And still with us in studio, Samuel Shai, chairman of the Israel-UAE Business Forum and president of Gulf Technology Systems, and our diplomatic correspondent, Eli Hochenberg. And Yair Lapid, we see there, making that visit to the USS Pearl Harbor, sending a sort of, I guess, a geopolitical message. Talk to us about what Minister Lapid had to say there in Bahrain, because certainly this, a lot of significance in going there and also what he said there.
Right, and usually during those types of official visits, especially such first official visits, the optics are very much significant, and I think, again, the visuals, the optics of this visit at the U.S. Fifth Fleet really speak for themselves, sending a very clear message to those who should be aware of the message. But going back a bit earlier in the day during the press conference of both foreign ministers, they were asked about the Palestinian issue and the two-state solution. The Bahraini foreign minister said that obviously Bahrain supports the two-state solution and would like to see some progress in this respect. And I'm not sure that the term is unsurprisingly, but definitely not as a big surprise. Israeli foreign minister Yair Lapid says that he too would like to see progress in this respect, that he too supports a two-state solution, but he did say that he's speaking on his own personal behalf and not on behalf of the entire government. And once again, we're getting not a sneak peek, but a very clear state of affairs when we're talking about this very, some would say incoherent, others would say diverse coalition here in Israel. And generally speaking, ever since the historic signing of the Abraham Accords, there was much speculation or questions on how would Israel's new allies in the Gulf react when it comes to Palestinian issues, and the uptick in violence that we've seen a few months ago vis-a-vis Hamas in the Gaza Strip was perhaps the first main test for that. And we've seen definitely restraint on behalf of both the UAE and Bahrain. They did not jump to intervene politically or diplomatically in this respect, giving Israel leeway in this regards. But when we're talking about the Palestinians in Ramallah, we are seeing perhaps changes in the administration in Washington, and also again here in the region. And the two-state solution, even though it was completely MIA from the recent speech by Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett at the UN General Assembly, is making its way back to the headlines when we're seeing such events or meetings taking place in recent months.
Right. We should know UAE and Bahrain have said they want to be involved and hope that their normalization process, Israel moves the Palestinian issue forward. Of course, that will also take some coming to terms by the Palestinians with the Abraham Accords. And Samuel, you've been focusing mainly on the UAE. It just seems that the relationship has galloped in so many aspects, business, cultural, social, with the UAE. With Bahrain, it's been a slower process. What are the prospects that you see for both sort of on the business side, but also just in general on the social side of also between Israel and Bahrain?
Well, as far as the Bahrainian, they are more conservative. You know, they are moving much slower than the Emiratis. The Emiratis, they are very developed. We can see it in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. But I think they got the concept and understanding what they need to do. And I think they're going to follow the footsteps of the Emirates, and they're definitely looking to develop Bahrain. I think Israel has a lot to offer, not only Israel, but also the business community of Israel and the technological community, and we can definitely do amazing things in Bahrain. We have much more opportunities to develop new businesses over there and a new venture, since they are much more behind than the Emiratis. So we definitely can come and offer a new cooperation. And I think the way it's looking right now, there's going to be a lot of new business with the Bahrainian in the future, and we're definitely going to develop a major project over there.
Well, I'm going to tell you one thing that could really help that. Gulf Air today launched the first ever direct regular service between Tel Aviv and Manama. The 3-hour flights will run every Monday and Thursday, costing about $550 round trip. Our correspondent Ariel Levin Waldman was at Ben Gurion International Airport today when that historic flight from Bahrain landed.
You can see a little bit of a media swarm here as the first flight from Bahrain to Israel has formally landed and let out a delegation of, well, not quite dignitaries, but mid-level bureaucrats, such as deputy ministers. A very similar presence from Israel's government was in attendance today with the deputy foreign affairs minister as well as the deputy economic minister to welcome their counterparts in Israel. It's a major accomplishment and physical proof of the Abraham Accords in action after Bahrain formally recognized Israel and initiated a form of diplomatic relations. On the other hand, we also have Yair Lapid in Bahrain at the moment, dedicating an embassy. So more on that as well. So the big question everyone's asking is, what's this really about? You have some mid-level economic figures here, but economics aren't the major basis of relations between the country. In fact, in the first 7 months of 2021, which was the most recent figures we have of this, there was less than $300,000 of bilateral trade between the two countries, which means it's not really about the economics. It is, as always, about the regional diplomacy and what the status of these two countries is going to be related to the threat from Iran. And certainly that's going to be at the top of the agenda and probably most of the diplomatic cables coming out of that new embassy.
And Ali, economics are part of it, and Ariel, right, it's only part of it, but especially with Bahrain, you have to imagine security is also a key factor. Let's keep in mind where Bahrain sits geographically. Right across the water, across the Gulf, there is Iran. And, of course, it's had some issues with its own Shia population there. Right. So certainly Israel, in terms of security, offers a lot to Bahrain.
Right, and this takes us back to our earlier conversation about the mere optics of Lapid's visit at the U.S. Fifth Fleet. Again, sending a very clear message to Iran and connecting the dots. Manama, Jerusalem, Washington. It is true that Washington took a step back, allowing Israel, the UAE, and Bahrain to kickstart relations on their own after the signing of the Abraham Accords. But when we're talking about the security aspect of it, Washington is very much invested and has a great interest to see this diplomatic alliance metastasizing or maturing into a more practical security alliance in this respect. And if we're talking about the changing geopolitics of the region, obviously security plays a major role, but definitely an interesting element of it due to the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, we haven't seen the peoples-to-peoples relationship in its full...
Between Israel and Bahrain, right. The way we've seen more with the Emiratis.
More so, but again, also not reaching its full potential right. Yet. Again, as you've mentioned, the airlines launching rather direct flights is a major aspect of it. But if we've said that the ceremonial part of these accords coming to an end or concluding to an extent, what we're likely to see from now is not just business, but also, again, more cultural relations and more people coming back and forth.
I would imagine that. So, coronavirus has kind of limited our, briefly, what we might see, which is Emirati tourism and Bahraini tourism to Israel.
Yeah, I mean, for one point, we need to start to disengage from the coronavirus lifestyle. We need to start to learn to live with it, and eventually in the future, as more we understand it, the traveling or the tourism between the countries will be expand and will develop. As we know, I mean, the Emirates have much more to offer as far as tourism that Bahrain. So eventually there's been more attraction and more demand for the Israeli, and they come more to Dubai and the Emirates.
Right.
And to Bahrain, I think as many Israeli people went to Bahrain, we can count them in 2 hands.
Well, hopefully, I'm just going to say there's a nice little Jewish community and synagogue there. I hope that attracts some Israelis, too, because they're waiting for them to arrive. Samuel Shai of the Israel-UAE Business Forum, or Eli Hochenberg, thanks for joining us.